Filmmaker Magazine presents Back to One with Peter Rinaldi.
Emily Mortimer is an actor. I sat down with her in her home in Brooklyn to talk about the work.
When you land the role and you get a script, what's the first thing you do?
I mean, it's really hard to know exactly what the first thing I do because every job is different, every challenge as an actor is different, which is partly what's so exciting about being an actor, and it's also partly what's so frustrating about being an actor because you never feel like you've conquered it because you almost feel like you start again each time you get a new part. So there is no real kind of methodology because different rules apply to different parts, to different scripts, to different jobs. You know, I wish there was a sort of checklist of things that you could sort of tick off and know that you'd done it all. But there isn't, and very often things like, you know, preparing for an accent is a relief, and it's a sort of feels like a blessing because although it's very challenging, it's something actually tangible that you have to do, which is work out how to speak your lines in an American accent or an Australian accent or whatever it is, the working class British accent. It's very tangible work that one has to do. And the preparation is kind of something empirical, you know. You have to be able to make your mouth form the words in a way that sounds believably like you come from a certain place, and that's kind of a relief because a lot of the time sitting down with a script and starting to prepare feels very sort of nebulous. It's like, where do you begin? There's no, as I said, there's no hard and fast rules. There's no one way of doing it. And it's like you have to kind of pluck from the ether a way in. And it can be really daunting and also really exciting. And it's the constant challenge of that I think keeps one engaged and keeps one part of what keeps one excited about being an actor. But having said it's impossible to know where to begin, I think I begin with trying to work out how my character fits into the story that's being told, how I will help tell the story of this piece through this person. I don't know whether that's because I come from a kind of literary background. My dad was a writer and I'm a writer too at times, and I studied English literature and Russian literature at university, and so I've been kind of educated in a lot of my education has been about storytelling. I don't know whether it's because of that, but I when I'm most excited about a part anyway, it's because I'm really excited about the story that's being told, about the story that the writer or the director, writer, whoever it is, the filmmaker is trying to convey, and I'm excited to be part of that, and in my little way to be contributing to telling the story in the most exciting and engaging and you know, thrilling way, and therefore I start by thinking about how can I play this, how can I work out how to do this, how to be this person in a way that is ultimately going to serve the story that this character finds themselves in the best. And that funnily enough is quite a good way in. You kind of, it's a process of elimination in a way, preparing for a role. It's like there are a million different ways you could go. There are a million different choices you could make. There are just a million different ways that you could play a part. But if you have to start somewhere, and if you start by trying to understand the story you're in and the world you're in, you've already made quite a lot of choices without realizing it. You've already kind of jettisoned quite a lot of different ways to go with that character and with that person. And then it's once you've tried to and that involves, I guess, reading and rereading the script and thinking about the world, thinking about trying to get into the head of the filmmaker who's making this thing, trying to understand the story that they're trying to tell as best you possibly can. as you do that, as I said, yeah, you're kind of eliminating lots of different possible roads, and you're left with then you're left with fewer roads which you could go down, and then you have to keep paring them down and eliminating other choices and until finally you narrow it down to just a few.
What is your relationship to the text early on? Like in when you're in that process of just trying to figure out your character's place in the story, are you beginning to try and take in the text?
I tend to leave the memorization for later, but I've started to think that might not be a good idea. That I've started to think as I get older, certainly, I'd like to try learning the text sooner. I mean, I've always had a facility for memorizing lines. I mean, I'm terrible at memorizing anything in real life. I can never remember anything. I can only have conversations about my children because they're the only two people on earth whose names I can remember. So I can't generally remember things, but I've never had a problem with memorizing lines, and so I've always sort of left it to the last minute and felt, that thing that people say, which is, don't learn the lines until you're ready, because you don't want to have them a set way in your head and have that dictate the way you play the part. And I do know that film acting, like film writing, like filmmaking, everything to do with probably any artistic endeavor, but especially filmmaking, it should be being able to change your mind all the time and changing your mind all the time until the last minute, until the camera is rolling. And it used to be until you could hear the sort of tick, 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 tick of the kind of reel. But, until the camera is rolling between cut and action, then, and that's even not the end of it. That's just a moment. You're capturing a moment, and you have to keep making sure that whatever is happening is as alive as humanly possible, and that means never setting anything in stone, and that means being really open, and that means preparing, but then allowing yourself to in a way, preparing is about feeling confident enough to give yourself the freedom to change your mind all the time about how to do it and to respond in a kind of immediate way to what's going on in the scene, and to not get set in your way. So it is very important with line learning, I think, to not learn your lines in a certain way or with a certain rhythm that you are then stuck with and you can't change and you feel, tied to. But I don't think that necessarily has to be the case. I think you can learn lines and still, as long as you just keep feeling open about them. And I think that it would be cool to, I would like to experiment with more in the future, just having the lines be something that's just sort of part of my sense memory, that there's just somewhere there, and I'm not even having to think when I speak at all, which is something I think a lot of theatre actors experience when they, are halfway through the run of a play or something. It's just that feeling of just, it's just part of you, and the lines are going to come out somehow, and you don't even have to think about them. And there's a sort of a magic in that, as long as you don't get too sort of tied into them. And I know that Ken Loach is a director who I really admire, and I always have found the performances in his movies to be just staggeringly naturalistic. And I once met his first AD in an elevator in London. We were all going to some party, and I was like, oh my God, tell me, how does he do that? How does he get these performances out of these actors? And a lot of it is, sometimes they don't have the script. A lot of it is that he doesn't often uses non-actors. But the first AD said something really interesting to me, which was that he will film an entire scene in a close-up, and then he'll go to a wide and he'll film the entire scene, and then he'll go back into the close-up and do it again, and then he'll go back to the wide, and then he'll go back to the close-up. And it's almost like by the end of the day, it's not just sort of one or two takes or whatever. It's like he's just worn people down to the point where they're not thinking about the words that they're using, they're actually just being, because they're kind of exhausted. And I found that really interesting. And so, yeah, I would like to really experiment with being kind of motivated enough to learn my lines way in advance of the performance, and really have it feel like it's just spilling out of me without much conscious effort. And I work with an actor in the Bookshop, which is the film that I did with an Isabelle Coixet film, which is coming out this year, and Bill Nighy, who's a tremendous actor, and he learns his lines religiously, months in advance. So he came, and he had huge long tracks of dialogue, and it was really remarkable, watching him work and watching these lines spill out of him in a way that felt, didn't feel over-rehearsed or stuck in a certain pattern or anything. It just felt really exciting and alive and fresh.
I saw the Bookshop, and there are some wonderful, long, in a good way, scenes.
Yes.
With two actors.
Yes.
Yeah, especially you and Bill Nighy.
Yes.
I mean, that are just, it feels like Isabelle Coixet was really letting actors work.
Yes, yes.
It felt like that.
Yes, she does.
Well, let's approach this differently. What do you need from a director?
Okay, I can answer that question. I think what you need from a director, well, what I need as an actor from a director is just the feeling that someone is noticing me. I know that sounds rather sad and pathetic, but it's kind of the feeling, how when somebody sort of, is interested in you, and it might be that they fancy you, or it might just be that they like you, or they're just sort of interested in you, and they want to know more about you, and they are aware of you. And any director that makes you feel that way, that makes you feel like they're observing you, and they're interested in what you're doing, and they're basically on your side, I think that's what you need. You need to feel that there's a gaze on you, and that person is there with you, and that they're just noticing you. And then you become your best self, much as you do if you know that someone fancies you or something like that. You suddenly you can be a little bit more confident in the way you tell your jokes, or the way you walk across a room, or the way just knowing that someone's watching you, and watching you in a kind of an accepting and curious and interested way, gives you a feeling of whatever you're doing suddenly becoming more interesting, and that's really what it is. And I definitely, the times when I felt that kind of observant, forgiving, curious gaze on me from a director have been the times where I've felt that I've been able to be my best self in a performance. And also, not just that, but what relates to what I was saying earlier at the beginning, which is a director who really knows the world that they are making, who is incredibly familiar with the world of their film, because that director will somehow, by osmosis, and it doesn't matter how, it doesn't have to be a conversation, it's just a feeling. Sometimes it's a movie they'll show you, like that's how Scorsese directs actors a lot, is to, before each film, you're shown 3 or 4 movies that are, relevant to the film that he's making. And somehow by just watching these other films, you kind of immediately understand the world of the film that you're in. With Shutter Island, it was that film Titicut Follies, that Frederick Wiseman documentary.
Wow.
And with Hugo, it was a film called The Rooftops of Paris. Under the Rooftops of Paris, a French film from the
René
19...
Clair,
yes, René Clair, exactly. And both, it was one film for each movie, in fact. And you just watch those films and you immediately understand... Somehow you just, immediately understand the world of the film that you're in, the world of the film you're making, and that's such a blessing and such a gift, and that just, as I said, it kind of eliminates so many choices. It makes you just be able to kind of focus your efforts and feel confident about the kind of character that you're creating. And so those were the two criteria, I think, that I think are most important. Just the director understanding the world of his or her film, and also just feeling that they care about you, that they're interested in you, that they're watching you, that their gaze is upon you.
Let's talk about Sorkin a little bit.
Yes.
I love the story you tell about walking from the trailer to the set, worried that your head will turn a certain way and the words will spill out. Yeah. Speaking of memorizing. Yeah. But I imagine at the same time, even though it sounds like fear in a way,
yes,
but it must have been exhilaration because of the writing and just the material and just
yes.
But talk to me a little bit about that experience.
Yeah, well, it was a very different experience from any that I've ever had doing the Newsroom, and it was really exhilarating and really frightening at times, but something that I think really helped me develop as an actor in ways that I hadn't done before. And partly in a way it was more like probably the experience of doing a play, and I've had little experience doing plays, and I want to, as I get older, force myself to do them more, because I'm really scared of the theatre. I really get terribly nervous, and I get all sorts of intrusive, irrational thoughts on the stage that, you know, I'm going to shout something out or do something weird or leap off the stage or sort of break the, you know, suspension of disbelief and screw it all up for everybody. But this was as close an acting experience to kind of being in the theatre without being in the theatre that I've had. And he's primarily, or started as Aaron as a playwright. And, you know, it was extremely exhilarating and exciting. We had these incredible deadlines where he was writing to a deadline every week and writing all this incredibly intense dialogue and monologues and everything, and he works to a deadline, so it was like literally being handed in at the last possible moment before they would have to sort of totally stop filming and move the whole thing and lose millions of dollars. You know, he was just like under the wire just at the very last minute every single week, and which added to the sense of sort of terror and exhilaration. And we would get these pages handed to us at sort of, you know, 10 o'clock at night, like sometimes the night before we had to perform, sometimes like only 2 nights before we had to perform. And it was brilliant, and it was like it was in a way so kind of perfect for the show that we were making, which is about putting on a nightly news program where everything is to a deadline, and you have to sort of get all your ducks in a row under the most extreme, impossible circumstances, and everything's changing all the time, and everything's a panic until the moment where the cameras are rolling, and then you have to just have total cool and calm and be collected in the face of total adversity. So it felt very right for the show that we were making, and that was helpful. In a way, it was a different kind of acting from normal film acting, or certainly from the kind of film acting that I've been used to, which is it's quite stylized. Like he's almost writing musical theatre in a way, in the way that he writes. It's almost like people singing to each other, and there is a kind of pattern and a rhythm and a kind of meter to the way that he writes that you have to honor. And sometimes it's kind of a couple of feet above the ground, the writing, and not completely realistic at all moments, and that there's a sort of a style to it, and yet try to keep it grounded and real for yourself, and real for the characters that you're with and the people that you're acting with, and try to connect to what's happening in a way that's real and believable. And so that was the challenge, I think, was the sort of honouring the stylized nature of his writing, and while trying to kind of be a real person. And sometimes I felt like, oh, damn, I'm not good at this. I don't know how to do that. There's a certain kind of acting that really suits Aaron's writing, and maybe I'm too English, or maybe I'm not right for this. But I think that sometimes that feeling is quite productive and creative, and sometimes the very feeling of feeling like you're entirely the wrong person for the job gives you a sort of adds something really interesting to your performance, and the feeling of not really knowing what you're doing. I had that also on the Woody Allen film Match Point, where I was playing this part and I couldn't tell whether she was meant to be funny or annoying or both, or whether she was a comic character or a sort of tragic character, or a kind of baddie or a goodie or what. And with Woody, you really are not allowed to ask any questions. Like, there is no rehearsal, in my experience, he was very easy to be around as a person. I could talk to him about anything from sort of jazz to curry, or where he'd eaten his curry the night before, and what was going on in the world, or the weather, but not about the script. And there was a real feeling that was a taboo. There was an embargo on any conversation about the actual job at hand. And so I was like every night coming home just going, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know how to do this. I'm going to be the one terrible performance in like the box set of Woody Allen films that everybody has on their sitting room shelves. I'm going to be the one just awful performance. And I think that there was something about the confusion and the sort of pain of the feeling of, I don't know how to do this, that had something kind of quite interesting to a performance sometimes. So I would say, if there are any actors listening to this that feel like they don't know what the hell they're doing, that is often the feeling that one has as an actor. And sometimes you're right, like sometimes it doesn't work, and sometimes you don't know what you're doing, and sometimes it communicates itself that way. But sometimes the confusion and the constant struggle to understand who you are and what it is, the tone of your performance, energizes the performance in a way that can be quite interesting, I think.
One of the episodes from Newsroom that I watched recently was the Blackout Part 2, which begins with a monologue from you.
Oh, yes.
I was fascinated by how it could have been really bad, very simply. Just a slight change in your tone with this writing. It could have been so different and not land at all. But you landed it perfectly tone-wise. And I'm just wondering, like, is there someone helping you? Is the director, because everyone's on the same page with this. There's many moments in the show where a slight change in approach or tone could make the material not reach me. Yeah.
I remember that monologue that you're referring to in the Blackout, where, I mean, it was terrifying having to do that, but it was, there are 3 or 4, every time you do a job, hopefully there's 1 or 2 moments where you feel like this kind of illusory elliptical phrase, being in the moment, but where that happens, where something happens and you feel for a second or 2 or even a minute or 2 like you're completely there and you're completely connecting with the material, with the character, with the storytelling, but you're not having to think about it. It's just coming and it's happening and it's just magic, and it's so exciting and so exhilarating, and it hardly ever happens, and you want it to happen all the time and it hardly ever does, and most of the time you're pretending or kind of reaching for it, but there are a couple of times, there's just enough moments to make you keep going and try again the next time, and want you to keep doing it. But in my experience anyway, and when I talk to the people I know and love who also do this job, I think I think when people are really honest, it's quite fleeting, those moments. But when they happen, they're amazing. And one of them was that monologue, that speech, in the Blackout scene in the Newsroom, and it's just a combination of things that happen where you've got this really challenging thing coming up, so you really work in a way that you wouldn't at less challenging scenes. So you really prepare because it's all on you, and if you fuck up, it's going to be really embarrassing. So it's just the sort of stakes suddenly get really high, and you really have to deliver, and so you work harder than you naturally would. And also, you know, it's a kind of an opportunity, and it's an opportunity for you, but it's also an opportunity for your character, and you don't want to let your character down, you don't want to let yourself down, and you don't want to let everybody else down. And so this, you know, the pressure is on, and you really work. And by that point, I'd got to a moment in the show where I kind of was beginning to understand who I was as a character. And no, there wasn't really any direction or anything, but I was kind of just directing myself, as we all were. And you just start, and you're thinking, just, Jesus, help me, God, this is just going, I'm going to die. And it is a bit like, I've only done 2 or 3 plays, but it is like the feeling before you walk on to the stage for the first time, where there's a little red light and there's a little green light, and you wait for the little red light to turn green, and you're looking at this red light backstage thinking, why am I doing this? I want to do anything but be standing here. This is like bungee jumping. Like, why? Everything in my body is telling me not to do this, not to walk onto the stage when that light goes green, but I've got to, because I'm stuck now, and if I don't, I'm going to ruin this thing for everybody, and all these people have paid all their money, and oh my God, and here we go, and the light goes green, and you're on. And it felt like that, waiting to do that scene in the newsroom. But once you've just stepped on, there's no going back, and it is like bungee jumping. And in a way, it's, not that I've ever bungee jumped, I've got no interest in bungee jumping, but in a way, that's when somehow kind of the magical feeling happens, where you're just like, okay, here we go, and you go, and it's like a little hand takes yours, and you're just, flying. And it's so rare, and it's... ironically, it's when there's a sort of, it's often when there's a kind of a flashy moment where it's really scary that happens. I had it with also when in that scene in Nicole Holofcener's film Lovely and Amazing, where I was standing stark naked for minutes at a time. Well, Dermot Mulroney was talking about my naked body, and it was the same thing. I didn't actually have to speak. I just had to stand there. But it was a similar feeling of, oh my God, something's happening here. I'm truly in the moment in a way that I've never been before, and probably never will again. But at this moment, as I'm standing here naked, I'm as kind of silly, brave, and crazy, and vulnerable, and kind of great as the girl who I'm playing is, and it felt like something was happening. It just felt like something was happening in that moment that was exciting, that was never going to happen again, that was really only in that moment, and you just feel really alive, and that happened as well in the Sorkin scene that you're referring to.
That scene in Lovely and Amazing is very powerful. I think it's the least gratuitous nude scene in history of film.
Me too.
But from an actor standpoint, just talk to me a little bit about that experience before you filmed it, knowing that was coming. Or
yes. Well, I read the Lovely and Amazing and the script of Lovely and Amazing, and I knew immediately that I wanted to try to be in this film. I just loved it. And I had to remember, I'd seen Nicole's other film, her first film, Walking and Talking. I think it was her first film, but one of her very early films anyway, in London, a year or so before. And I'd already been really inspired by her as a filmmaker. And then I read that script, and it just really affected me. It was really moving, and there was just something incredibly honest about it. And I just wanted to play that part, and so I auditioned for it, and honestly, I wasn't really thinking about this nude scene. It was, when you read a script, you really are just focusing on the scenes with dialogue where you have to speak, and when you're auditioning for something, you're especially just focusing on the scenes with the dialogue where you have to speak, which you're being asked to audition for. So the nude scene was neither here nor there. I knew that was part of it, but it wasn't something I spent too much time thinking about. I knew that this was a character that was very worried about her body and concerned about it, and she was an actress, and she had some sort of dysmorphia about her own body that was affecting her ability to be happy. And so that was important, but I'd sort of glossed over. I was kind of in denial about this nude scene that was coming up, because I think if I thought too much about it, it was going to freak me out. But I knew I had to do it. I knew it was part of the thing. And in a funny way, I had always had this attitude to nudity that was, you know, I came from my dad was a very liberal kind of criminal defense lawyer. He defended the indefensible. He defended lots of murderers. He did a lot of free speech. He defended a lot of pornography. My parents were both very kind of liberal, and there wasn't any issue about nudity as in terms of a kind of a moral question. In my mind, that was just something that wasn't a big deal. And I felt like, honestly, it's so much more embarrassing to sort of not be funny or to be bad in the scenes where I'm having to kind of act and say words than just, you know, standing there with no clothes on. That there's nothing you can do about that. No one can judge you on that, really. That you know, you can't stand somewhere with no clothes on, well or badly. So that's what I was thinking, and so I was just sort of like, this is fine. I was glossing over it in my mind, but then me and Nicole, because the scene involves, for anyone that doesn't remember or hasn't seen the movie, it involves me going to bed on a sort of one night stand with this kind of movie star, or sort of low-level movie star played by Dermot Mulroney, and we wake up, or it's after we've made love, and I ask him to do me a favor, and I'm going to stand on the other side of the room, and he's going to naked, and he's going to analyze my body and tell me from top to toe what's both good and bad about my naked form. And because it was me, and I was going to stand there naked, and I was going to be filmed naked for the scene, we had to, before the scene was shot, we had to kind of customize the dialogue for Dermot to speak. And so Nicole and I went through it, and I had to tell her all the things that were good and bad about my own body, and, you know, all the lines. He says, you know, well, you've got a nice smile, oh, your teeth are a bit yellow, your hair's a bit greasy, you know, your boobs are nice, then turn to the side, oh, they're a bit droopy from the side, then it goes down and down and down, the bush is big, that you could do with the trim the trim, you know, and all this stuff. And again, it seemed sort of so, it was funny, it was kind of a funny exercise. I wasn't really thinking about the actual thing of it. I was just really committed to playing this part. I remember caring so much about everything, and because in a way the character was a version of Nicole herself. It was very autobiographical, and the family was certainly a version of her own family. I was feeling like I had a special sort of duty to her and to the movie, and I loved it so much, and I just didn't want to screw it up, and I was this English girl pretending to be this LA actress, and so I was just really committed, and that's all. I cared desperately. I really cared, and it was an example of the first. It was the first job I got where I was like, okay, I just want to make this film the best it can be, and that's always the best feeling, when it's not about you or showing off or trying to be the best you can be and like make everybody think you're great, or it's when you love the material so much that you don't want to let it down, and as it keeps going back to that same thing that I started with, which is you want to help serve the story the best you can, and then it stops being about you, and then in a way that's when you can really be free, I think, with a performance, when you're just really serving the story and it stops being about vanity or showing off. Or anyway, so that was what was happening all through the filming, and then finally we got to this scene, and lo and behold, we were there, and I was lying in bed with Dermot, and I had to get up and stand up and be butt naked for minutes at a time while he analysed my body. And I can remember as I walked from the bed to the fireplace and to stand there, I was just thinking, oh my God, this better freaking be good, this film, otherwise this is just going to be the most embarrassing moment of my life. What am I doing? And suddenly, you know, it was really intense in a way that I hadn't imagined it would be, being this kind of person that I hitherto was sort of unconcerned about nudity, really, but it was really extreme and really intense in a way that I hadn't foreseen at all. And I stood there, and as I said, you know, there was really no gap between me and the character I was playing. And I'd never been to drama school, and I'd often heard people, and I often felt kind of a bit less than, because I never studied professionally. I just went to university and then straight into acting, and I often felt like I was a bit of a sort of imposter because of it. And people had used this phrase, this mythological phrase, being in the moment. And I kept thinking, I don't know what that means. And, oh God, I'm never in the moment. What is that? And then suddenly in that moment, I was just more in the moment than I ever have or ever will be. And it was thrilling. And it was kind of, in a way, the beginning of me taking acting seriously, taking myself seriously as an actor, feeling a feeling of how exciting it is, as I keep saying, you know, when the gap between who you are and who you are playing is just gone, and you're the same person, and it feels really good. You know, it feels really cool. And then when they said cut, and I came off the thing, and there was Nicole, and she was crying. She had tears pouring on her face, and I was like, "Oh my God, that was amazing! That was actually really wild," you know. And I do really feel very attached to that film, and grateful to Nicole, because that moment and that performance was the beginning of me thinking, this is really definitely what I want to do with the rest of my life, and this can be a really kind of noble profession, and also a really exciting one.
How did you approach the idea of playing a character named Emily Mortimer?
Good question. Well, it was a really complicated and kind of amazing journey. Getting to play a character called Emily Mortimer. It was a real process, much more of a process than you would imagine. Because me and my best friend Dolly had written this thing, and it wasn't really us that we were writing about. Right. It was a relationship that was inspired by our friendship. But we have a great friendship, and she's never been my personal assistant, nor will she ever be. And we've never fallen out or had any kind of weird imbalance of kind of like, we are so sort of relentlessly addicted to talking about everything that before a problem's even become a problem, we've talked about it and it's not a problem anymore. So we just have a sort of sick fascination with kind of, you know, toxic relationships, and we love the idea of you know, what happens when somebody employs their childhood best friend to be their personal assistant, and the answer is everything goes terribly wrong. Sure. And so of course when we were writing it, or when we were coming up with the idea, we were putting ourselves into it, and we were putting the way that we react to things and the way that we might react if we were in certain situations to, you know, into it. But it wasn't, in our minds, really us. And then Isabelle, our director and our friend, who we've known for years and had all hung out with in Echo Park back in the day, and kind of grown up together in our late 20s, I guess. When we just, as an experiment, just did a few scenes together in my trailer on the Newsroom, actually, and he shot them just to see whether we wanted it at first, Doll and M, to be an independent film. We didn't want to make a television show. Mm-hmm. But it was Azza that, once he'd cut these few improvised scenes together, said, this is a TV show, this should be an episodic thing. And when he first cut these scenes together, we didn't have names, we weren't giving each other names, really, but he wrote Doll and M on the little sort of link that he sent us to these initial first improvised scenes, and it just stuck, and we just were too lazy in a way to change it. Mm-hmm. And then we shot the whole season, and then when this thing was about to come out, we were like, oh God, this is a nightmare, everyone's going to think it's us. And I was like, Dolly, I hate you, everyone's going to think I'm just a horrible, like, demon actress that makes you pick up my knickers in my trailer. And she was like, I hate you, I'm not some sort of subservient, like, you know, personal assistant, and everyone's going to think I'm some loser. And we were like ringing up us and saying, we hate you. Why have you made us call ourselves by our real names? And, you know, why can't we change it? We're going to dub it. We're going to dub the whole thing. It's going to be sort of Paul and Pen or something, because we can't be ourselves. This is just too weird. Anyway, and then the thing came out, and of course there was something really intense, and it added so much to it that we were calling each other by our real names, and it added, I think, to the performance at times. Like, there were moments where we were where we were falling out with each other, where we were having this big sort of quarrel, and I was behaving most like somebody out of Sunset Boulevard or something, and a turban on my head, but we broke up, and saying each other's names to each other, you know, and saying, you know, doll, I can't, you know, this isn't, you know, or whatever, or her saying, you know, we can't see each other anymore. It felt very emotional in a way that it wouldn't have otherwise. But yeah, it was hard. It was like, wait, no, those people aren't us. And we were definitely playing characters, but there was something about the kind of shorthand that we have between each other that was really authentic and really real, and the ease with which we interact that made it, I think, it gave it a kind of base level of reality, of authenticity, which allowed us to then really kind of screw around with the places that those characters went and the way that they treated each other, because the audience was like so committed to our friendship, because our friendship is really real, and so then you could go and take it in all different twists and turns and get really outrageous, and the audience would still follow you, because they were like, no, these people are really, really friends. This isn't ridiculous. This is really happening. So it was interesting, but it was hard. It was hard to sort of, you know, be ourselves or to allow ourselves to be playing versions of ourselves, and even to admit to ourselves that we were. And then the second season became almost a comment on that, because in the second season, we're writing a play. She's no longer my personal assistant. She's just come to stay, and we're on we're as equals writing a play together about two characters who are very similar to us. And then we hire actresses to play us, and there's this whole kind of, you know, Olivia Wilde and Evan Rachel Wood play us in the play within the TV show. And then there's this whole kind of meta sort of mirror up to nature, you know, House of Mirrors type situation, which was happening in the first season too, because Dolly's real life husband, Misha, was playing my husband. Dolly's kids were playing my kids. And then in the second season, we got our own mothers to play our mothers. We got, not only was Dolly's husband playing my husband and her kids playing my kids, but my own son was playing my kid in the play within the play. And Alessandro was playing my husband in the play within the play. So there was this just whole sort of meta-reality going on, where we were really kind of commenting on the confusion of being, that had taken place in both of us, of being kind of creators that were creating characters that were not dissimilar to our own, and how odd that is, and how exciting it is and revealing it is of certain aspects of oneself that one didn't even really realize were there. But yeah, it's a different kind of acting when you're acting in something that you yourself have written and that is in some ways a comment on your own life. It's a totally different type of acting, but it was really fun, ultimately really, really fun and exciting in a way that is a completely different way from anything else I've ever done. There was both a feeling of like, we took all our families with us to work, which we've never done before. You know, the part of the real pain of being an actor is that, you know, you have these incredibly exciting and dangerous and thrilling and terrifying periods of your life when, and generally they're separate from your family, completely separate from your real life, and you know, and you generally go far away from home in order to have these experiences if you're a film actor, and they become something that's sort of quite threatening to your real life, or can be, or can feel threatening, because you go off with these people that none of your family have ever met. They don't know what you're talking about when you come home, and you have to be careful not to bore on too much about it, but at the same time you have to talk about it in a way so that they do feel as involved as they can, but they can't really feel involved, and part of the point of it is that it's your private sort of thing. But here we were making a TV show where we just included everybody we knew and loved, and they were all part of it, and they were so invested in it, and it was so fun, and it became like in some ways a sort of family photo album that we'll always have, of all our family and all our friends and all the people that we love and have loved collaborating with over the years, and there they all were on one project. So there was that was really special about it, but also, the acting, specifically the acting part of it, was really weird. Again, it was another version of the gap between me and who I was playing was hardly there, but it was there. It wasn't like it was me. Mm-hmm. But then again, I guess that brings up the perpetual question, the sort of philosophical conundrum, which is, who really is me? And in some ways, every time you do a job, whether or not you're playing a version of yourself, or whether or not you're playing a sort of TV news producer, or Lady Macbeth, or whoever it might be, or a woman that's opening a bookshop in the 1950s, in a way, that's just as much a version of you as the person that's sitting here talking to you, recording into your device, because we're a million people, and there is no one person, and that's I think that's part of what's, again, the kind of constant draw to performing, is that sometimes it's overwhelming how many people we are, and how confusing life is, and how kind of open-ended it is, and how just as you think you've worked out how to live it or who you are, everything changes and you have to kind of regroup. But when you're acting, it's kind of finite and it's simple, and you're being somebody at a particular moment in their life. And if you're doing a film, as opposed to a television show, there's a beginning, a middle, and an end, and it just feels sort of more containable and processable, and there's a kind of catharsis to being able to kind of understand that person at that moment in their life and commit something to film of that and then walk away from it. It's a relief compared to the rest of life, which is really very confusing.
Emily Mortimer, thank you.
My pleasure.
So much for this.
My
thank
pleasure.
You.
Back to One is a production of Filmmaker Magazine, which is a publication of IFP, the Independent Filmmaker Project.